Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Packard Network Live. This is a very special and different type of live stream than I normally do because we have a most important topic to speak about that my esteemed panel, who I'll introduce in a moment, and myself are quite passionate about. And this live stream is being streamed on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and it is targeted directly at parents anywhere in the world. At least 5,000 people will see this on replay between now and Sunday, and probably be in upwards of that. And we do have people tuning in live. I'll be engaging with you. So please let me know in the comments section, especially on LinkedIn and Facebook, if you where you're at, and just type in that you're watching live, and I'll make sure I acknowledge you. And please do tee up questions in the comments section as well, and we will get to those questions. And if we don't do it within the next hour, I'll make sure, and my colleagues here will also make sure that we do respond after the live cameras go off. So this conversation today is only the beginning of what we're going to do to collaborate and amplify our voices for the sake of protecting our children. And also, as many of you have engaged on, that these things that are happening to our children do carry forward in years into the workplaces, unfortunately. And so while today's focus is on bullying in schools and how to actually work within the existing policies of the schools. We can't boil the ocean today, so we're not going to debate how to change those, but maybe another day we'll talk about that, but not today. We're going to really tool up the parents for what you can do within the current system in the event that your child is bullied at school. And that's really what the goal is today. That's my commitment to you for giving us an hour of your time, or whatever else on the replay, to work that way. So that's the goal. It's quite simple, is to give you a toolbox, okay, that way as well. We've put together a panel here, and I'll do some quick introductions, and then we'll get right into the topic as well. But we've put together a panel here. My colleague Sajal and I, thanks to Sajal, she was able to get a lot of people in here through her extensive network. And Kalyani, who you'll hear from, is going to tell a story of her daughter that was recently went through a terrible incident at her school that was bullying. And so I think we've put together a panel of people that are non-bullying experts and bullying experts, okay? And some are bullying experts in the workplace and not in schools, and that's intentional, okay? And one of the powers of diversity, I having worked across 30 countries over 30 years, one of the biggest benefits of diversity is being able to get people from the outside looking at things, as in whether you're trying to build in an inclusive culture, whether you're looking at bullying in schools. Sometimes it's good to get people outside of the system to actually look at how can you best use what that system has set up as rules. And so that's a bit of behind the design on this that we might do if the networks would like it. We might do a future panel with educators. Okay, so we'll see what the feedback is on that as well. And so today is the beginning. It's not a one-shot fits all. So I'm going to get right into it and introduce my esteemed panel here. And it's great to have everybody on board here. And I'm going to start with Sajal Thacker, who is coming to us live from San Francisco. And Sajal is on a mission to educate and empower people to create a world where everybody is treated with dignity and respect. That's at the center of everything she does. She's a former employment law attorney. She's a 2 times TEDx speaker as well. She recently gave her second talk, and she's the founder and chief civility officer at Train Extra. And she's also responsible for creating a people first culture at Nobody Studios, We have also Catherine Mattis here live from La Mesa, California. Catherine is a workplace bullying expert. She's a culture consultant. She's a strategic HR expert, a business coach, a LinkedIn learning course author, an international speaker, a book author, and a course author and instructor for LinkedIn Learning. So a lot of credentials, a lot of experience in the people space and the treatment of people. So we have Dr. Chris Lee joined us. Dr. Lee, thank you for joining us as well. Dr. Lee is coming, I think, from the Woodlands, Texas today. And Dr. Lee is a change and development learning. She's an anti-bullying advocate. She's the president of Chris Lee Consulting Group Incorporated, and she is an expert in organizational development services as well. So I'm very honored to have Dr. Lee, you here on the panel as well. We have Dawn Marie Westmoreland from Asheville, North Carolina here. Similar accent to mine, but not quite the same. But Dawn, it's great to have you here. And Dawn is has a passion for respectful and safe workplaces. It's in her DNA. 30 plus years as an HR consultant. She's also a syndicated radio talk show host at WPVM 103.7, the Voices of Asheville, and she's on the air again tomorrow. So I asked her when she's on the air again next, so you all can, thanks to the internet, anyone in the world can hear her on the radio. She is also a columnist writer for the Good Man Project, and she's a Thrive Global contributor as well. So Dawn Marie, it's wonderful to have you here as well. We have Chris Evans Bien from Redmond, Washington here. Chris is a communications leader, a board member, a community builder, an advocate for youth, and she's a former she is a Microsoft alumni and also worked for ABC News in New York in the past. So lots of great credentials. Really honored to have you here as well, Chris. Then we have Kalyani Pardeshi here, who is from the greater Calgary area. Kalyani, I got to meet several months ago. Wonderful person, and she actually inspired us to put together this panel based on an incident you're going to hear about in a moment. And Kalyani is an anti-bullying specialist. She's also the course instructor at kalyanispeaks.com. So, and she's also written a book on bullying as well. So we'll make sure we do plenty of engagement where you, the parents, can access the extensive resources that are out there with the people on this panel as well, and you can reach out to us. We're easy to get hold of. We have last but not least, Mr. Brian Kelly, who's coming to us live from the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. I'm really excited, Brian, that you've been able to join us today. Incredible credentials. They're very long. I'm not going to go over them all, but Brian is an expert in human resources, people, leadership, culture. He understands ecosystems in excruciating detail, what it takes to construct them and make a sustainable, profitable culture for companies. He's a mindset coach. He is an expert in leadership development. And he takes high achievers and basically makes sure that they are inclusive leaders as well, something that's very important in today's world. And these are the people and the leaders that are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, the people that are inclusive. Brian is the president and human connection officer at Brian Kelly Leadership Coaching, and he's also a caring leadership coach at Employee Fanatics. I hope I pronounced that right, Brian. Thank you for joining us, Brian. It's great to have you here as well. So that is I'm Brett Packard. I'll keep the abbreviation short. Ex-banker, now a LinkedIn sharer. of 30 years of leadership experience. And let's get into the subject as well for the sake of the parents. I'm going to start by asking Kalyani to take 5 minutes and describe briefly what happened, Kalyani, to your daughter at school roughly a month or so ago. If you could please tell us that. And while she is speaking, please do tee up your questions, because as soon as Kalyani tells the story, I'm going to acknowledge those of you that are tuning in live. Kalyani, over to you.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate it. And hello to everyone. So basically, about 3 weeks to a month ago, somebody threatened to stab my daughter with a pair of scissors in class. And she managed to get away, went to a teacher, spoke to the teacher. The communication between the teacher and the principal left a lot to be desired. After securing my daughter's safety, and I knew about the incident because she texted me from school, I did not hear from the school at all. I waited 5.5 hours to hear from the school about the incident. When I didn't, I reached out to the principal very factually about what happened and just asked the question, what are you going to do about this? I want to know. And the principal took almost 12 hours to get back to me, came up with a plan. She said she was going to investigate and let me know by the end of the day. We had a call, came up with a plan of action. This happened Thursday, Friday. On Monday, the plan of action wasn't followed through. I got the police involved. Tuesday, we had an in-person meeting, and I had to sit down and tell them that this is what was planned. This was what was not done. How do we fix this? And I use, and this is something I've done, and I've written about it also in my book, is using loopholes in the system to ensure the safety of your child. I got what I wanted. Even though they're actually not legally allowed to discuss what they do with the other student, it was discussed with me. And the one thing I made very, very clear is I did not want the other student to be punished. I wanted them to learn a lesson, because I truly do not believe punishment works. So that was basically the summary of it. And I'm happy to talk about the loopholes. Brett, you're muted, sweetheart. You're muted, Brett.
Sorry about that. Okay, great. Kalyani, thank you for that great summary as well. Brian, could I ask you, I believe that you had, it was your nephew, if I'm not mistaken, that recently went through something as well. Would you take 2 or 3 minutes and tell us about that as a backdrop, please? I think you're on mute, Brian, here. Just a sec here. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different scenarios with my nephew. The most recent one involved a videotaping of an incident that was off school grounds and sharing it amongst the school in a way that it was malicious in terms of it was friends having a sleepover. An event happened, and my nephew got beat up, and he didn't realize the situation was what it was. He thought they were just joking around, and that got spread by somebody who actually got hold of the video. The guy that got hold of the video was someone that had been bullying him since elementary school, and so then subsequently every day at school he would get confronted about this, and at one point he had to step up and defend himself. He got tired of hearing it in the face. Resulted to physical, which we didn't condone, but he didn't feel like he was getting the support he needed from the school because there was no trust there. He had been through the process since elementary school of reporting and not getting any closure to issues, any building any trust with the administration that anything would happen. And so there's a bunch to this story, but that was the most recent one. And this bullying has been happening probably, what is he now, 7th grade, probably about 4 or 5 years now. And that gets to the repeated nature of it when the discipline isn't something that deters future behavior. And that's the thing we've been experiencing and struggling with.
Right. Yeah. And I think we all know that this bullying in the school systems has been going on for a long time. I was bullied in elementary school, right? And I won't get into the details of it, but it wasn't pleasant at all when that happened. And I hear similar things that happened to me. This in the 1970s, right? similar things happening today, right? It just crushes, but inspires me to do something about it. So that's why we're here. Now, a lot of people, in the run up to this live event, a lot of people talked about the fact that they're afraid of retaliation if they're bullied and they raise that particular thing. Sejal, could I just tap on you to just share any perspective that you might have about retaliation if that comes up, so that parents can understand how to handle that?
Sure. Thank you, Brett. So I think it's important for parents to understand that retaliation is prohibited, right? But I don't think everybody really understands what it is. So I wanted to just kind of really quickly tell you what the elements of retaliation are, because when you start wanting to protect yourself and your child, you need to be aware of what you need to document and why. So under the law, if you make a complaint of bullying, or you participate in an investigation. So there has to be some sort of protected activity, right? So the first thing you have to show is that you engaged in some sort of protected activity. So you have to be able to show that you made the school or the district aware of the protected activity. So I'm going to talk to you about why that's important in a second. So there has to be a protected activity. You have to make the school aware of the situation that's going on. And then you have to show that your child or you as the parent were subject to some sort of adverse or negative action by the school. If we're just focusing in on retaliation by the school. And then there has to be some evidence that there was some causal relationship between you engaging in the protected activity and the negative action or the retaliatory action you're claiming is happening because you engaged in that protected activity. So once you show those elements, then the school can turn around and they can defend themselves to say, we have legitimate, non-retaliatory or non-discriminatory reasons for why we took this action. Right. So that just gives you an idea of what retaliation is and what the school needs to show. So some examples, I think it's important to also share a couple of examples of what retaliation looks like with parents, right? So teachers retaliating against the student. So you complain about bullying and now the teacher is turning around retaliating against your child at school. Now their teacher is at being active or hostile towards the parent, right? That would be a form of retaliation. Or let's say you have siblings that are in the same school and now they're denying benefits or treating the siblings differently, right? So these are just some examples of what it looks like. Now, what do we do in these situations? I think as attorneys, on this call, we've got some, we would always say document, 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 right? Because again, I just went over the elements. That second element of showing that the district is aware of the protected activity, you need to prove that. And so keep accurate records of all the incidents, document the dates, the times, the locations, the names of the witnesses, all the facts surrounding the bullying incidents, right? Who you made the report to. I also would suggest that you ask for a meeting with the people at the school and document what was discussed at the meeting. Now, I have talked to a lot of parents about bullying with schools, and I always recommend that you also document afterwards, after the meeting. Send an email to the school saying, okay, as we discussed, and maybe Kalyani could talk a little bit more about the follow through. Here's what was agreed to happen. Here's the plan of action. And this is what you're going to do because it may not happen, right? And so you want to have documentation of all the things. The other thing you want to do with retaliation too is know what all your options are, right? Can you file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights? Can you file a complaint with CPS? Look at your policy that the school district has and make sure you follow that policy. So you need to be familiar with what the policy is and follow those procedures in the policy. Also, I think it's important to document what your child's experience is, because as more time gets away from the incident, children will forget certain details. So have accurate documentation of that. You may need to contact law enforcement, right? If there is some physical or sexual assault involved, then you may need to contact law enforcement. And then I always suggest, maybe you need to get a special education attorney, right? That's specifically familiar with how schools work, so that they can assist you and support you through this process. Because let me tell you this, and I'm just going to end with this, is that if the school is retaliating against you or your child, they can go to ultimate lengths to destroy evidence. I've heard of documents getting lost. I've heard of records getting lost, emails all of a sudden disappearing, right? So you need to do what you can to preserve as much of that evidence as you can. So if you've got emails, print them out. So you have hard copies of them. If you got text messages, if you've had phone conversations, keep the log of the phone conversations you've had, right? So I'll stop there and open it up to the rest of the panel. Maybe Dawn, if you want to add some more on that. I know you've dealt with retaliation and you've documented well. So if anybody else wants to add, I'll just kind of open it up or turn it over to Dawn.
Thanks, Sejal. Yes, I do workplace bullying, and I get often called in to help with children that are being bullied. And I'll say my claim to fame is documentation, which Sejal talked about. And I'm a firm believer of documenting everything. Even if somebody doesn't respond back, still print it out. And I also say, don't leave it, make sure that you don't leave it at school or, leave it at work. If it's a work situation, keep it at home in a safe area. And retaliation is real. It's real because, I went through retaliation for speaking up about hiring practices in the government with the second largest federal agency. And I'll make it very short, but, I lost 65% of my income when my income was cut off. I'm retired from the Air Force. I already had that. And yes, so I lost home, 65% of my income, had to sell a lot of my items, and I'm very straightforward, because of all the stress of harassment, phone tapping, I was in the mental health ward for a few days because I didn't feel safe and I was exhausted. But I tell that to people, not for pity, but just to realize how bad things can get. And fortunately, I had a very good outcome, all because of my documentation.
Fantastic. I think we've just heard a treasure full of information. Kalyani, before I ask you to speak again, let me just do a quick acknowledgement of some of the great people. We've got people from all over the place on this as well. Lygia, thank you for tuning in from Costa Rica. It's great to have you here. And thank you for inspiring all of us every day. It's fantastic. Lygia is passionate about children and the future. She's a teacher. She's an English teacher in Costa Rica as well. And so everybody should be following her. We have Dinah here as well. I'm not sure where you're from, but it's great to have you here. We have Meredith Bell here. Meredith, thank you so much. Appreciate you tuning in as well. We have Carol Campos from Massachusetts. We have Lori Seg. I hope I'm pronouncing that right as well. And I think you're dialing in from or tuning in from an airplane, if I'm understanding that correctly. So this is great. So no excuses not to turn into this, even if you're at 30,000 feet. Let's see. So we have Carol Hink as well. We have Dinah Indorato as well. She sends her apologies to your daughter, Kalyani, as well. We have Rebecca here as well. Rebecca had a question. Rebecca, maybe I'll just ask you to clarify that a little bit more, and then I'll make sure it gets asked. Can you give an example of these elements? If you could just expand on that a little bit, I'll do that. We have Celia Daniels as well. Claudia Grace. Claudia, thank you for coming in. I knew you mentioned last night that you'd be here as well. You're from Maryland. And we have Gary Spencer from the UK, all the way from the UK here as well, and appreciate all of that. So please do tee up your questions and we'll get to those. Kalyani, let's jump over to you. And you want to pick it up where Sejal and Dawn left off?
Yes, I love what they both said about documentation, because this is something that I teach. So these are the questions that you sit down with your child and you document this. Very, very important before you go to a meeting with the school. And ask the child, what is the objective of this conversation? Number one, what do I absolutely need to say? What are the facts in this? So the who, the what, the when, how often, where, why, and how does the bully get away with it, right? Next question, what are your feelings in this? Talk about your feelings: fear, anger, frustration, embarrassment, shame, sadness. The two most important questions I feel in all of this is, what are possible objections or questions you might get from the teacher or the principal? Anticipate that, and write down your responses to these objections and questions. And then you take this to the principal. And the most important thing here is the loophole that I talk about is, yes, they cannot discuss with you what they're going to do with the perpetrator, but they can fully discuss with you what they are going to do to keep your child safe. So ask the question, what are you going to do to ensure my child's safety when they are in your school? Because when they're on your premises, it's your responsibility to ensure their safety. What are you going to do? And follow up. Just say, you know what, like they both said, I love what Sejal said, I love what Dawn said. Follow up. If it's in an email, I will catch up with you next week, this time, this date, expect a reply. One of the things the police said to me is that he was happy with the procedures that the school came up with, and the school would call me, and that was before we had the meeting. And I replied to the police officer and I said to him, sir, with all due respect, there's a difference between plan and action. The action does not match the plan. I will wait to hear from the school. Should I be dissatisfied, expect to hear from me. Be firm, be fair, be respectful. Let them know you're not going to be walked all over. But the most important, so those list of questions, write them down, watch the replay, write them down, write it down with your child. It's like Sejal said, over time, kids forget. One of the things that I found is that they get so emotional because they're hurting so much, rightly so, that they're not able to get all the facts out. So if they actually just, like I say, watch the replay, write those questions down, get those answers out of the child, and then take it from there.
Yeah, great perspective. Would anybody like to add anything?
Brett,
what-
I just want to add
sure.
one thing,
Sure.
one thing. And remember, you can anonymously report as well. So there are situations you have to use your discretion, because I know some people are afraid of reporting because they fear retaliation might happen to them or their child. There are situations where you may want to consider anonymously reporting. Now, the downside of doing that is that the less information they have, the less they can report on, right? So that's the downside. But if there's a real legitimate fear of retaliation, that is an option that's out there. So I do want the parents to know that this is why you want to be familiar with your policies and very familiar with them, because there may be other ways that you could report aside from having to report it directly.
Yeah, and I just like to reinforce that, having worked in corporate life for 30 years, in corporate life, we call this whistleblowing, what Sejal just mentioned. And I will tell you that using the whistleblowing processes in companies has saved the companies hundreds of millions of dollars. It has saved employees jobs that otherwise they would have unfairly lost, and all sorts of stuff. So if you see something wrong and you're not comfortable doing it, okay, whether you're at work, but today we're talking to parents, blow the whistle. Okay. Report anonymously. If you're nervous, it's better than not doing anything, because this has gotten to the point that I was talking with Claudia Grace, who's tuning in live here last night about this, and it's gotten to the point where we have to do something about that. And my mindset is that if we don't do something about that, are we complicit in it if we're aware of it? So let's move forward with it and use the anonymous reporting if need be. Okay. And so anyway, anybody like to add to that, or we'll move on?
I was going to just jump in for
Dawn.
1 second.
Oh, sure. Chris, yes,
Sorry.
please.
Sorry about that. I was just going to say I used to work for a school district in the midst of some issues I was having with my kids in the school district. And one thing parents need to be aware of is that school districts have teams of attorneys that are there to protect the school district. And that is their job. And that is the role of the school district, is to keep the school district looking good to the community. So as far as like the documentation and all of that is right on, that is definitely something you also need to, besides the school's policies on these things, is understand the chain of command. So, where did the incident happen? Who's the school principal? What's the chain of command within the school district of who you need to know? And make sure you're copying all of those people on your emails, because it's going to be really important that those people have accountability within their own system and institutions as well.
Yeah, I mean, the first theme that we're really realizing here is raise the issue, whether it's anonymously or non-anonymously, and document. Keep the stuff. And not only, I just like to add, not only would your kids that are going through the trauma maybe forget what happened, but we as adults, I don't know about you, but I, as an adult, I forget what happens all the time. If I don't write it down, 5 months from now, what really did happen. So write it down and do as Jim Rohn says. I tell people all the time, don't treat your brain like a filing cabinet, because it's not, as much as we'd like for it to be. Write it down and then just keep it, right? Lock it up somewhere. Brian, could I ask you for your advice on this? What could we do to encourage kids and make it safe for them to communicate with the school when they experience bullying? Any ideas around that?
So making it safe involves trust, right? So it's got to start inside the family unit, right? In terms of creating that safe environment where the kid can have a conversation, and do it in a quiet place where it's just the two of you. Listen, let me say listen like 3 or 4 times, listen, and then document, as Kalyani and others have shared, in terms of what you're hearing here, and just let them know you're documenting so that we can get the facts straight, right? Because that's going to be important during the process. And one thing that I wanted to share intentionally coming into this, that we've tried to get an understanding of what exactly the school had on record, was to ask for the student record, so that we could see actually what actually made it to the school record from the reporting that my nephew had done. And so we're in the process of going through that, but that's something you're entitled to. You can make that request for the school record, as I understand it. And so that gives you a sense for what's actually available from the school versus what you have available. And then you can work towards what improvement might look like, right? In terms of process, communication, chains of command, like we've talked about. And so those are some of the things in terms of improvements and encouragement. We encourage, even though, it's been tough because my nephew hasn't gotten the response he was looking for, and the closure and the follow through, to continue to have him report that, even though, and the things unfortunately keep happening. So we continue to do that. Then we have to get smart as parents or advocates, in my case, of looking through the lens of what can we do, right? And so Kalyani was talking about loopholes, right? And thinking in terms of, as I mentioned, the school record, because we've had the conversations all the way up through the superintendent. We've had those kind of conversations. The thing that's missing is the closure for the victim and the family, in terms of something gets done, right? And so that erodes trust. And so then, what asking these questions and what can we do, and understanding what role people play in the process, and having the conversations with them to ask the questions you need to ask is it gets to accountability and expectation setting. And Kalyani's distinction was really important, and I like that she did that. Is they can't tell you what they're going to do with the perpetrator, but they can tell you what they're going to do to make the environment safe for your child. And that's why these follow-up meetings that seemingly go nowhere, just being persistent and asking the questions you need to ask, because what it'll do is it'll reveal opportunities for improvement. And then we can focus on not so much the perpetrator and what's happening with them, but what are you doing to keep my kid in the environment safe, for not just my kid, for the other kids in the school? Because part of the reason why kids, and my nephew, I think, falls into this, is brought the issues up, is because he didn't want this to happen to other kids. And so it's something, and so it's not just I'm trying to protect myself. And then, the reason not to is because of reputation, especially as you get into the high school years. They don't want to be the person that's ratting on their quote unquote friends. And so I think that's another aspect too, is it takes courage to share these things and put them out there and be a leader. And that's what I think, we've got to start looking at these kids that step up into and share these things as leaders and in difficult circumstances, and to provide the support system they need to be able to do that.
And I think at the end of the day, everybody wants a safe, they want the schools to be safe, right? So, and I mean, the tragedies of what's happened with guns in schools, we're not talking about that today, but bullying is also a tragedy, right? because this can traumatize somebody for life when it happens. And so I think that, Brian, I really applaud your nephew in this case for the real purpose of speaking up, which wasn't, he was looking out for other people and the environment and how to make that actually safe for everybody. So please do speak up with that. Hey, Catherine, I just want to acknowledge, is there anything that you want to add to this so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
I think
Okay.
one thing we're not talking about here is the courage it takes to speak up. So for example, I have a LinkedIn Learning course on being or intervening as a bystander. And that's a whole piece of that course is dissecting where the fear comes from in speaking up so that you can pick through what's just your instinct telling you not to jump in front of a bus and what's kind of a real fear so that you can, think that through and make sure that you're approaching the school and your child from a rational, logical place versus what's happening? My child's being bullied. You better fix it, and yelling and showing up. So if you're going to really resolve this, you have to pull back from those emotions in some ways and really focus on the logistics. And I talk about that in workplace bullying as well. Obviously, this is very emotional, whether it's your kid or you at work. But responding with or having an emotional reaction doesn't serve the situation well. You're heightening their fear, because I talk about this when I coach leaders who engage in bullying behavior, and I talk about fight or flight with them. And I think it's also relevant here. You're feeling afraid because you're worried about retaliation. What's going to happen? Is this going to be fixed? You show up to a principal and say, this is happening, you're creating fear for them, and they're going to respond to that instinctual fear. And so remembering that this is a bit of a dance in helping everyone maintain their emotions is going to be a super important piece. But, just acknowledging the courage that it took for your child to bring it up and, focusing on that and that recognizing that it takes a lot of courage for you to speak up to the school and go through it.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you, Catherine. That's incredibly valuable advice. And the whole emotional aspect of this is because everybody gets emotional, including the principal, right? So, I think it's very, very important. So for you parents, today's for you to please understand that, and please understand that the person sitting across the desk from you at the school that you're dealing with is likely to get emotional as well, whether they're showing it or not. Some of it could be unconscious as well, but they are feeling some emotion and some pressure when that happens. I just want to acknowledge, I've got some great comments here from a few of the people tuning in live here. So we've got Steve Sellen. That was Steve. Thank you for telling us you were bullied when you were in elementary school and you're in a special needs class. I'm so sorry that happened, and I'm equally sorry that it's even happening today. Not just in special needs classes, but in other classes as well. It's just, anyway, that's why we're here. We have Lori Urseg here, who has said, and I'm just going to read this. It's a bit of a long comment, but Lori is I'm a semi-retired teacher and now teach parenting and teaching with love and logic. When actively teaching 2 years ago, I had to anonymously report a teacher that was demonstrating behaviors that were extremely detrimental and damaging to students. I was not the only reporter, and that teacher left the school 2 weeks later. I agree, by the way, documentation is everything. I was taught that long ago. So there you go. There's something that, Lori, thank you for sharing that. First of all, I'm sorry that happened, but you did something, you spoke up, did something, and there was some action that was taken here as well. Claudia Grace, last one, we'll get back to the panel. Never question the victim and the person bullying at the same time. This silences the victim and gives even more intimidation. So that's a great tip, Claudia. Thank you for that. Parents, never question the victim and the person bullying at the same time. Okay, so please do that as well. Gary has a question, and I'll open this up. Anybody on the panel that would like to take it from the UK. Do you think schools fear these processes and behave in negative ways rather than be proactive about these issues? Any comments from anybody on that one? Kalyani, anything you, sorry to call
Sorry,
on you,
I
but you
glitched
just
a
went
bit.
through. Yeah.
Yeah, I just glitched. But can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Do you think schools fear these processes and behave in negative ways rather than be proactive and prohibit the issue in the first place?
There is a possibility. I do know from my experiences, because my daughter, in this has been my experience. I'm not saying that this is what everyone experiences, but my daughter experienced more bullying than my son did. And, I find that they're always trying to like sweep it under the rug sort of thing. I get that feeling. And the most important thing is, as parents, do not give up following up. I love the way Brian said is you got to be persistent. It's when when they know you mean business, they have no choice. Like, you're not going to just let it go. You're just not going to let. My son was aggressively bullied by this one kid, and we took it up to the district office, and they had eyes on the principal. And my husband literally, he went to the office and he sat down there to the principal's office, and he said, you know what, I'm not leaving here until I am satisfied that my kid is safe in your school. And what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about that? And yes, they will tell you stories. They will tell you stories because obviously they're overworked, underpaid. I respect that. I understand that, they've got enough to deal with. But, and again, I love what, I think it was, I can't remember who said it, but the emotions, Catherine said it, the emotions. When I went through what I did with my daughter, I spent those 5.5 hours processing my emotions. I didn't bottle them up. I screamed, I cried. I swore, I cussed, I did all of that. But when I sat down to write down that email, I was calm and I just stated the facts. So yes, they do tend to avoid these issues if they can. My whole point is, as parents, do not give up. Do not give up.
Yeah, I was speaking with Dr. Lee on this a while ago, and she had Dr. Lee had a great question here, and I'm just going to throw this out there for anybody on the panel that would like to take a crack at it. And again, tee up your questions if you're tuning in live, because we will get to those. How do we combat the old-fashioned messaging to children to not be a tattletale or a snitch? Brian briefly talked about that and the real purpose of his nephew, but back to this question, any responses on how we can combat that, oh, you're a tattletale, because that can lead to a whole other bullying incident in itself. Right, Dr. Lee? And did I get that right?
Yes. And the reason I asked the question is we are working at it with another purpose now, which is to have the opportunity for children to feel safe and talk about these things. However, if they are continually being messaged in some way or another, either by adults or by other children, that it's bad to be a tattletale, it's bad to be a snitch, these things get categorized. And I think that the last thing that most children want to do is tell. And so the many situations that happen to children in which they don't say anything at all to their parents, I don't think it's because they're afraid to tell their parents. I think that they already have some sense of being stigmatized if they do by the broader world. So I think there is a larger messaging that needs to happen to help combat this problem. So that was why I asked the question. I think just sort of, at least maybe I'm remembering things from my childhood. This was a common thing. Don't be a tattletale. Something would happen. You'd have a little conflict with another child, and maybe someone was really mean to you. Maybe they hurt you. And if the response that you got was don't be a tattletale, are you going to ever say anything again? Probably not. So you tolerate it and you learn, but then of course the victimization gets worse and worse, right?
I mean, when I was bullied in the 70s, and this isn't about me today, but I didn't raise it to anybody because because the guy that did it to me basically said, if you tell anybody that I did this, then it's going to get worse. And I was afraid. So I went home and cried and kept it to myself. And I was lucky in the fact that he kind of let up. Right. So, but that also isn't common to get lucky like that. Right. So I acknowledge that as well. But being a more educated Brett now, if it happened again, I would do something about it, knowing what I know now, but I didn't know then. Yeah. I was afraid.
Yeah. Just a very short example.
Please.
From my life, my sister and I went to her 50th high school reunion, and she found at the reunion party another person, a woman, who had been her high school bully and had bullied her terribly at that stage. And so she the best part of this party is when she told her off at the party, like 50 years later. But that meant that she carried that for 50 years.
Yeah, that's sad.
This is the weight of this type of pain all the way through adulthood. You remember those things because I do think they are traumatic experiences.
So parents, so far in this, the big things that are out there, the big advice that I think collectively the panel is giving you is please raise the issue. Don't do what Brett Packard did back in the 70s and just make sure that your child understands that we can raise it. We can also raise it anonymously, as Sajal mentioned, that is an avenue. You might be a bit more limited in terms of the follow-up. It might be more difficult, but raise it, get the ball in play so that we can do so. This is the only way that things are going to change within the current system. And then document. And what we heard from Brian is make sure we reinforce, great behaviors to victims of wanting to raise an issue for the betterment of their classmates, right? I mean, I think that's wonderful what your nephew did, Brian, as well. So please reinforce that behavior, because what you reinforce, you're going to get a lot more of, right? And this will help people. This will help your children as they enter the workforce down the road as well, because these same behaviors, guess what? Most of them apply in the workplace as well. Dawn, do you have anything to add at this point? Chris, anything? Chris
I
Evans?
sure do.
Yep. Please.
Thanks,
Please.
Brett.
Yep.
I'd like to emphasize this. Years ago, the Christian Science magazine, one of the correspondents interviewed me about why it's important to be a whistleblower when, there's an issue. And, 2 times I've been a whistleblower, in the Air Force and the Veteran Affairs. And yes, a lot of retaliation, death threats, things like that. Usually that doesn't happen in the schools, thank goodness. But the final outcome was massive change for the better. So it is important to speak up. And so many comments have been made about feelings and how it harms the person. So I'd like to address this, because this is what I teach my clients, is that if somebody is depressed, anxious, not sleeping, having issues related to stress, they really should go to a doctor and have it documented. And not only document it, here's the thing, you can't just go and say, I'm stressed out, and the doctor writes, Tommy's stressed out. That doesn't mean anything. You have to tie it in with Tommy's being bullied at at XYZ school. And then if you have to, hopefully you don't have to go into litigation, but I've worked with people who've had to go into litigation, and I'm telling them, be sure when you see anybody, if it has to do with mental health, and that's so important these days more than ever, is that you have to see somebody who is qualified to diagnose you. If you go to your priest, your pastor, your rabbi, that's wonderful, but they are not qualified to diagnose you. Where a mental health expert, a psychologist, psychiatrist, somebody who's qualified to diagnose you says, Tommy is dealing with chronic depression because he's being bullied by XYZ at school. And then you have some serious ammunition if you have to use it. I know, because I used it myself, and so have my clients.
Wonderful advice. Thank you for that, Don, as well. Chris Evans, anything to add?
I was just going to say, with two of my kids, when I asked them about bullying, they would never admit it. They were in high school, junior high age, and they would never tell me a straight answer. But there was huge issues with reluctance to go to school. And I fought the school for 4 years about some of the issues they were having. And two of my 3 kids did not graduate from public high school as a result. One had to go to 2 years of private school. We had to change schools because we could not get cooperation with the schools. And then the other one finished high school this year at a college. So sometimes you may not be able to work out the difference with the school, and you may have to take your child out of the situation. And I guess the other thing I just want to reiterate is find an ally, whether it's another parent, a friend, someone through NAMI or YMCA. I put both the links in the chat, because I spent 4 years doing it, and it was so much anxiety going into these meetings. So I had to even bring support people with me because it was so stressful as a parent to retain that calmness and tell your story to these people. Because even though you think they're there for kids, they're not always there for your kid as an individual. And so, they may be trying to do the best they can with the resources they have, but you just need that support system.
Yeah, it's a great point, Chris. I want to go back to some parents tuning in live. We have Susan Forster, and I just want to acknowledge that this is a big one that we won't be able to tackle today. But Susan, it's a great point, and Susan is raising the point that the most effective way to handle this is to implement a system-wide program where everybody's trained, parents, teachers, students, on all aspects of dealing with bullying. I think I see a lot of nodding heads here. I think we all agree that is clearly something, and maybe we'll pick this one up in a future one. This is a big one. A lot of stakeholders, a lot of school districts would need to get involved. But Susan, it's a great point, and I want to acknowledge that, and Susan did this apparently 24 years ago. So Susan, I'd like to speak with you maybe separately about what you did. She did it in Oakland, California, 24 years ago, and she's concluding by saying that the same behaviors carry forward into the workplace. So, I mean, this is a great way to impact society, right? If we can get our arms around starting with arresting bullying in school. Susan, thank you for that as well. So back to Linda Grace has said there's a catch-22. By telling, there's retribution. By not telling, there's continued bullying. Many cases are documented in the 30s and 40s on behavioral observations. So good comment. I think we agree with that. Sensitivity training is necessary not only for students, but teachers and administration as well. So I think we're getting a couple of comments here, and I see some affirmations with the panel here with nodding heads that maybe we all agree that the system probably needs some tweaking, revamping, something as well. And again, we'll save that one for another day because it's too deep and we're a bit short on time as well. And lastly, and then I'll get back to the panel here and before we wrap up, schools are often assessed by their behavior score. Administrators avoid enforcing policy. As a former teacher, I had to wait 6 behavior offenses before sending the student to the office. Okay, so Claudia, thank you for that. I happen to know Claudia in the professional space, and I appreciate you raising that, Claudia. And I'll speak from my experience, never administering a school, but what you measure is what you get. And I can tell you in a corporation, if you're not going to measure inclusion, you're not going to get inclusion. If you're not going to measure profits, you're not going to get profits. And in schools, if you're going to measure something like this, you're going to get what you measure because that's what humans do. So Claudia, thank you for raising that. We'll note that for the future and maybe look to tackle that down the road. Kalyani, is there you wanted to just make one comment about the tattletale matter as well. Could you just briefly comment on that?
So the tattletale, when someone says you're being a tattletale, ask them the question. If there's something you don't like and you don't like how it makes you feel, are you going to keep quiet about it or are you going to talk about it? Because you have to ask that person the question, make them think. Like, if something doesn't make you feel good, are you going to keep quiet about it? How do they feel about that? Right? I just want to quickly touch on what Brian said about closure. It's important to ask the victim of bullying, what does closure feel like to them, independent of what is done to the bully? Independent of that, because if your closure depends on something happening to the bully, then you're going to keep holding on to that, wanting that closure. But what is closure can be, I just want to feel safe going to school. And take that to the authorities as well. Love what Brian said also about listen. What does listening look like? It's not like, oh, I understand how you feel. I know exactly what you mean. No, it doesn't. You don't say things like, when you're listening, you say, I am listening. That must be so hard. How can I help? Your feelings are valid. One of the things I do with my kids all the time is I ask them, do you want me to listen or do you want advice? And that's how we carry on with the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, good. Folks, I'm mindful of time. We're gonna go until about 2 minutes after the hour because we were about 2 minutes late getting started. So I'm just gonna maybe go around the room if there's anything else to add by the panelists. I think we got to all the questions in the live, and I'm gonna just mention something here for those of you watching this on replay, which there'll be a lot of you. Please do keep the questions coming on replay, and we will make sure we respond to those as well. We want today to be the beginning of the construction of a toolbox that parents can use, and I really hope, and we'd love to hear your feedback, that you've heard about what some of those tools are today that you can use immediately, and having knowledge of those. If this does happen to your child, you know what to do as well. So anything before we wrap up? Brian, anything further to add above and beyond the wisdom?
No, I know Dawn wanted to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about policies real quick.
Sure.
And I
Okay.
can make it really quick.
Sure.
A good resource for anybody listening or to pass on is, I'm going to give you the website.
Mhm.
It is, I lost it a second. Here we go. stopbullying.gov/resources/laws, plural laws. Most states have policies. All of them have laws, but not all of them have policies. I would encourage people to Google if their state has a policy. Look at it, because you need to know what the policies are, how they define bullying. And then you could take that verbiage and say the following is happening and tie it into the policy. And you can also talk to an attorney if you need to. If you're a state that doesn't have policy, and there are some out there, and it's embarrassing, my state, North Carolina, only has laws and not policy. Get a hold of your officials, your government officials, and show them what a policy is. You can Google it really quickly, just, state policy for anti-bullying in your state. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Don, as well. We'll make sure we get this information for those of you watching into the comment section and the repost of what we're doing here. So we have a lot of info to reinforce after this loaded 1 hour. So we'll do that as well. Anything, Chris Evans, anything to conclude from you?
I think this has been a really good session with a lot of resources. I think getting the book list from all the people here would be really helpful. And speak to the educators in your life before it happens. Make sure you have a good relationship with your teacher so that if something's happening in the classroom, you have a teacher you can go to. It's really important to know the people at the school, your principal, the people in the office, the support staff, whatever you need, so that if there is an issue, you don't feel like it's an us and them relationship.
Right. Because at the end of the day, it should be a partnership, right? All of this. And because the goal is to safely educate everybody. Doesn't mean educate one particular race. It doesn't mean educate one particular gender. It means to educate everybody in a safe way. Okay. It's the same thing as in a work environment. Everybody should demand and expect safety when they're at work. Okay. Why would it be any different in schools? And the fact that we have bullying means that it is different. Okay. So, which is why we're having this program today. So for those of you in the education system that are watching this is not a us against them type of thing. This is just getting some people away from the situation of voice with some ideas on how to leverage the actual processes that you, the educators, have set up. We're not proposing in this session that we revamp any of those. We're just wanting to use what's already there. And so I hope you will take it in that context as well. And that at the end of the day, it'll be a partnership between parents, principals, teachers, and everybody on the same team. And hopefully today, but there's always going to be issues. So hopefully today will help us better handle those issues as well. Anything further? Dr. Lee, anything to close out? You've given some great information here.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I was thinking about, it was a question you asked earlier, Brett, was about, did the school administrators get emotional or angry or have some reaction around being confronted with a problem in any way? And I was thinking about this because in terms of our skills as human beings, when it comes to any type of conflict, if your primary style of handling conflict is conflict avoidance, which is what I have seen many times, and I recognize the behavior more and more, but conflict avoidant behavior on the part of school administrators means that it takes a lot longer to get to a point of collaboration. And that's what we're calling for, right? The ultimate goal here is we build systems, we build collaborative relationships in which we can collectively protect our children who are vulnerable sometimes to other situations. So this nature of conflict avoidance, I think, is important because I bring a parallel to this in the workplace. If you've been in a workplace bullying situation and you've brought this up, typically the person is going to avoid the situation. That would be their first response. So conflict avoidant behavior happens whether we're dealing with school administrators or we're dealing with different levels of management. But the price tag for our children's experience is much, much greater and much more severe. So I think there is learning around this that will help to get to a more collaborative place.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lee, for that as well. Sejal, anything closing from you?
Yeah, I just had a couple of points. I think it's important that one thing we haven't talked about here is parents talk to other parents, right? So talk to them about their kids and if their kids are being bullied, because if your kid's being bullied, pretty sure other kids are getting bullied too. So talk to them. Again, document those conversations about what they told you, what they disclosed. Be very specific, right? Don't be general about that. The other thing I think that's important is I think it's important to follow up with your child after the situation has been reported and maybe even improved. Don't just say, okay, everything's fine now, and then not follow up with the child. Continue to come back to them to ask them questions about what's going on, even if it has improved, and praise them for talking to you, right? It's very important to encourage the children to talk to you. And you don't have to wait till the bullying happens, by the way, parents. Don't wait until your child gets bullied to start talking about these ahead of time. So build that relationship earlier. And one thing that I found that I use a technique with my son is talking to him about, age appropriate, right? But what I went through when I was being bullied as a way to tell him, look, you're not alone. Everybody goes through it. So then it's not your fault. We've all been there, but let's talk about it so that you can reassure them that you are there to support them, right? And so it's important to start having these conversations now with your child and not wait. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, we haven't talked about this here, is cyberbullying. Make sure your child understands what cyberbullying is, and therefore they can talk to you about that, because children don't understand that this can happen online. It can happen on the phone. It can happen through text messages. So parents, you need to educate your children that it's not just something that we think about in the schoolyard with the physical, it could happen online. And as Brian's experienced, once it's online, it can go viral, right? You put a video out there, and now it's repeated behavior then, because every time somebody looks at that video, it's another instance of bullying, right? So just some more points. Obviously, what I've learned is a lot from this conversation. We need to have more of these conversations. So thank you again, Brett, for leading this panel with such grace and bringing out these issues. And thank you, everybody, for joining in today and really sharing your wisdom with all of us.
Yeah, thank you, Sejal. And briefly, we're really running out of time. Kalyani, anything to close or to add?
Just importance of talking to your children. Don't ask them, how was your day? You can start with simple thing like, what was the coolest, saddest, funniest, scariest thing that happened today? Tell me one non-academic thing you learned today. If you got to be teacher tomorrow, what would you do differently?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And for those of you parents, I'm going to wrap it up now, and I'm not going to summarize everything. We'll do that in the repost of all of this. But the one thing I do want to leave you with, parents, is that you have names of the panel. You know how to reach us with the panel because you're watching this right now. So we can, if we're not the expert, we can certainly point you in the right direction. So I hope this was useful. Let's keep the conversation going. We intend to do that in probably different ways and similar ways. We may pick up other topics as well, but please do feel free to engage us ongoing as well. So for now, thank you all for tuning in. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you